Hello, podcast listeners. This is Steve Vancore, and this is the FMEA Power Podcast. Our guest today is the FMEA President, Ed Liberty. He's the Director of Electric Utilities of the City of Lake Worth Beach. He turned around a utility that was struggling, and his observations about what it took to turn around was not what you think. At least I don't think it's what you think. He's really smart, he's really dedicated to his craft, and a really good public servant. This is one of our earliest podcasts, and I think you're really going to enjoy listening to Ed Liberty. Thanks for listening. Greetings, I'm Steve Vancore, and this is the Florida Public Powercast, a production of the Florida Municipal Electric Association. Now, this episode is brought to you by Praxel Line Services. Praxel Line Services is FMEA's elite sponsor. Thank you to the good folks at Praxel Line Services for sponsoring this and making this episode and this series possible. Now, each episode, we sit down with leaders and experts from Florida's public power communities to explore issues, innovations, and people shaping our state's energy future. Our guest today is FMEA's President, Ed Liberty, who is the Director of Electric Utilities in the City of Lake Worth Beach. Used to be Lake Worth, same city, new great name. Now, before I tell you anything about Ed, and Ed introduces himself, I want you all to do something for me. Tonight, go home if you have children, and they're in that age where you start having conversations about occupations. I want you to ask each of them, what do you want to do when you grow up? Now, I have 3 boys, and they were either wanted to be video game designers, baseball players, or firemen. But if your kid is a real nerd, they're going to say, I want to be in the power generation business. So today's guest, Ed Liberty, is the king of the nerds because at the age of 10, he told his parents, I want to be in the electric business. Ed, what was going on there? You were 10, man. You're supposed to be a firefighter or a baseball player. What were you thinking?
Well, that's right. And, thank you for having me on today. Yes, at the age of 10, we were living out of the country. I grew up in a family where my dad was an engineer, building power plants internationally, and we traveled as a family. And at the age of 10, I vividly recall it was summertime, and in Spain at the time, Wednesdays were a half a day, and Saturdays were a half a day of work. So he would take me to work with him on those days. And I got to go to work with him, and he had me in my own jeans, my flannel shirt, a pair of work boots, as a small kid, and got to be in the construction trailers and walk around the construction site, see the power plant under construction, and I knew then I wanted to do what Poppy did. That's where I wanted to be.
Well, first of all, as a parent,
that's what got me into.
When your kid says they want to do what you do, that just warms your heart, right? To say, wow, my kid wants to be like me. Now.
Yes, it does. Yeah,
and it's a little different perspective. You're walking around with giant Tonka toys out there. So you'll probably be like, oh man, this is so cool. They're moving dirt around. They got big giant toys. That's really cool stuff.
Yes, it was. And we had the obligatory, dirt moving of toys as well in the yard and play with that stuff. But it was seeing the steel go up and all the massive stuff involved with the power plant and hearing the sounds and the noise, the steam coming out. And it was just, this is really cool stuff. I want to be a part of this.
That actually is pretty cool. Well, let's get right into the business of the business. So you've made significant changes, upgrades, and improvement at the electric utilities in Lake Worth Beach. Tell us a little bit about those improvements and why you felt the need to engage. How long have you been there, by the way?
I've been here a little over 8 years. I joined in August of 2017. I arrived on the scene here.
Okay, so tell us about you saw a need for upgrades. Tell us a little bit about what some of the stuff you guys did.
Well, when I first arrived and started to take a look around, interview staff, drive the neighborhoods, look for information, see what I had gotten myself into, I can say now in hindsight, realized that there was quite a bit lacking. We very definitely had poor reliability. We had failures every day. It was crisis to crisis to crisis on a daily basis. The simplest of things that and you learn growing up in the industry, for example, tracking reliability and performance was not in place here at the time. It may have been many, many decades earlier, but it ceased to be done. So we had to start measuring and inspecting for what we expected, at least for what I expected. Also needed to assess the team. Very good people on a team, but not well organized. Everybody was in crisis mode and jumping on the ball, if you will, picking up the fumbled ball. So what we needed to do was create some clear lanes and expectations, roles, and rules of engagement, and clearly dividing operations from the line department, from engineering, customer service. What I would say is the compliance functions, meter shop, all those types of things needed to be firmly defined and divided into
it's funny because when I as an outsider looking in, when I first saw this, I thought to myself, well, it was probably, new wires, new generation systems, new this, new that. But it's interesting that you started with organizational culture before you started talking about the technical engineering aspect. So what was it about the organizational culture? And remember, part of the goal of this podcast is for those listening to take away something and learn something about what your success was there, and so they can apply it to theirs. So let's focus. I want to start with the organizational culture. Then we could talk about the technical changes, because it sounds to me like what you're saying is you can't make the technical changes unless and until you have the organizational culture and structure in place and everybody's rowing not just the right oar, but in the right direction.
Correct. Getting the organization right was very important. They needed to make sure that everybody was working in the area that met their strengths. So fortunately, we had a team of very, very good people. So the motivations, the qualifications of the people was not at issue. Neither was their desire to learn. That was all there. What they needed was direction on how to divide their immediate efforts into lanes so they could be much more effective, and make sure that engineering was engineering the best solutions, operations was dealing with operations, and that they were listening to each other. So the things that were important to system operations were sometimes dismissed by the engineers, who were obviously very technically competent, but they had an engineering solution, whereas the system operators had a very clear understanding of where the weaknesses in the system were and where the limitations were. And then, of course, you had the linemen and line women who were out there on the street making the repairs, who would often say to the other two groups, there's a better way to do this. So they were talking past each other because they were in constant crisis, not because they didn't like each other. They did like each other, but they weren't listening to each other and coming up with a coherent plan on how to move forward.
You hear about that a lot in sport. You hear that a lot in sports. The new coach comes in and says, we've got the talent. And now what they need is, organizational from the top to lead them and show them where to go. So it sounds to me like your first job, what you didn't have to worry about getting competent people, you had them. You didn't have to worry about getting motivated people, you had them. You didn't have to worry about getting properly trained people, you had them. But what you had to do was get them properly aligned and organized in a way that they could work together, listen to each other, and respond in ways that were most efficient and most effective for the organization.
So one of the most effective tools early on, and people didn't necessarily see the value in this, was we implemented a mandatory morning call, 8:15 a.m. every morning, a discussion between all of the group leaders with me on the phone about any safety issues that may have come up in the last 24 hours. And then, what are your plans for today? What are you working on today? So each group knew what the other groups, and each individual was required to come to the staff meeting with what I refer to as a significant items report. Initially, that kind of scared people. They said, oh, wow, I have to basically justify every couple of weeks what I'm doing. And that's no. If you spend more than 10 minutes writing this report, you've spent too much time on it. I really want you to write down what are the significant issues that you're working with.
I love the fact that the first idea was, okay, safety. Are there any safety issues? Now let's talk about operations. So then that was a call everyone. How long did those calls last?
Those calls typically take about 10 minutes, and we've been doing them for almost 8 years now, and they're well attended, mandatory, every morning, 8:15. As a matter of fact, it became so important in the culture that it had an unintended outcome. I find that my department heads are calling in for that morning call, even when they're on vacation, which was not my expectation, but it's hard to convince them not to. So almost 8 years later into these calls, they're still calling in on vacation, even though I clearly say, please take a vacation and assign your second in command or third in command to take the call. They're still on these calls every morning. They're so committed to this communication. It's important now.
Wow, that's very cool. So technically, so it sounds like operationally, that was your first order of business. You got the cultural alignment. You got everybody on board. You're calling the 8:15 huddle. We're called to play, and everybody goes and runs the play. But every morning is impressive, by the way. What about technical changes?
We had to make significant technical changes. What we had here was a system that was designed really back in the pre 1985, 1890 or 1990 timeframe. And it was a single radial design. It means it had a defined beginning point of interconnection and defined endpoint, the end of the line. And everything was hanging off of a series of extension cords that were literally dangled across the city, operating at different voltages. And if you lost one section of a line, you lost the whole line. So we needed to basically redesign that system to operate on one common voltage. That voltage needed to be one that would allow us room to grow into the future. So for the technical people on this call, we decided to continue down the path of converting from the old 4,000 volt system, we refer to as 4 kV, to a common 26 kV system. That was number one. We had to settle on that voltage. We went through that and said, that's going to be the voltage. Number two, we decided that we were going to do voltage conversion. At the same time, we were going to strengthen the system or harden it and begin to loop things. So we were not going to hang new infrastructure on old poles. So we had to decide what the wind strength was that we were going to design the system to. So sometimes just for effect, to get people engaged, I'll say some extreme things and set it out there as a goal. The concept of we're gonna put a man on the moon, right? That kind of an idea. I said we're gonna rebuild the entire system, and we're gonna rebuild it to 26,000 volts or 26 kV, and we're gonna build it to Category 5 wind strength. Well, people say, well, Category 5. How did you pick Category 5? And I hadn't done a lot of engineering design on this, and I said because there's no 6. So we're going to build for the strongest storm we think we could possibly get. We're not going to do a 2 or 3 or 4. We're going to go right to the 5. And we're going to build it right because it has to be here for the next 30 to 40 to 50 years. And we're going to convert and harden. So from that came the acronym of System Hardening Reliability Improvement. That's not necessarily unique to us. We didn't invent that. SHRIP, SHRIP. And that became the acronym. The other significant thing, and I tend to call these significant emotional events in the evolution of the organization. I asked for a plan to fix the problems. We started measuring reliability, and there was a little apprehension at first that not only were we going to measure it, but I intended it to publish it. And we did, in fact, start publishing reliability numbers, and they were atrocious. But it served as a benchmark.
Before you get into reliability, I want to go back to the hardening and improvement. That had to be a 10-year project. You don't just
it's easily
and replace 8,000 poles overnight. But so you had to also map out not just what the end goal was, but the timeline to get there.
Yes, that's correct. And it was a complex exercise. It was actually closer to about 13,000 poles in the system, but we could only do it piece by piece. And I would jokingly say, in the pirate area, say this is like building a ship inside a bottle, but while you're drinking from the bottle at the same time.
Yeah.
Because while you're rebuilding the system, you're supporting customers. So we're basically building a new system in parallel with the old system, and then over a period of a few hours, typically on Saturdays or midweek morning, we'll take customers down for a few hours, swap them over to the new system, and then wreck out or tear out the old system. So we also had to match that with our financing capability. So the funds are never endless, right? It's not a bottomless pit for access to money in municipal power or even in the investor-owned community. You have to raise capital to do these projects. So we had to look very closely at our rate structure and understand what our costs were and determine how were we going to layer in the cost of new construction, new capital, new equipment into the rate equation. So while this was going on, we also undertook a very aggressive cost-cutting program. So we don't have enough growth in customers to fund the tens of millions of dollars which we issued through bonds. We had to create some very significant cost savings. So we were reducing costs while we were layering the capital and then layering into capital the construction program and converting customers over. So that all had to happen in
And was there a
parallel
communications
make
to
it.
the public part of that? Because obviously, if you start embarking on this and you say, and I'm just going to throw a number out there, we have to raise rates $10 a month ish on the average for the average homeowner. They will, of course, get angry and lose their minds and get all upset and blame whomever. Um, so did you explain to them? Did you work with the community outreach to say, hey, your system is now less reliable than it should be. We want to make it reliable, built to a Cat 5, better service and lower, I guess, like in the industry, talk about, your ongoing maintenance costs. When you have a dilapidated, beat up old car and you have to bring it in for $500 a repair every month, by getting a new car, you reduce those out-of-pocket monthly expenses to fix it and keep it up and running. Did you have to articulate some of that to the public, and what was the reaction?
The communication campaign was extensive. So I became the face of the utility as the leader, and spent a lot of time in one-on-one with our city commissioners, spent a lot of time in community organizations, speaking with them. We launched our own website, citizen-owned-energy.com, to talk about what we were doing and celebrate our successes. But we also did very public meetings in meeting with the city commissions. So initially, we were able to find savings that were so substantial that we actually reduced rates, and we became one of the lower cost providers in the area. So one of our benchmarks is being able to have rates that were competitive with the neighboring investor-owned utilities. And that was important to us. So we were able to bring our rates down to the point where we were competitive. At the same time, we were laying in, tens of millions of dollars of capital investment. So some of that also required working with our finance department so they could understand the value of capitalization versus, operations and maintenance, or O&M expense.
Yeah, that's what I meant. You invest $100,000 in this product, and you reduce your monthly maintenance expenses by $5,000 a month. Over time, it's going to pay for itself. Can you give me one good example of where you saw money being spent that was useless, and you said we need to cut this expense? Because you said there was just massive amounts of waste. Can you give me?
There were large. I think what was misspent was we kept fixing things over and over and over again instead of investing in a good solution. But the reason that they weren't making an investment was because there wasn't access to capital. So we had to straighten out the financials and then get a good investment grade rating, which we did. And it was just a matter of reorganizing things. That it wasn't a lot of a hocus pocus, but it was reorganizing things in a way that the financial community, namely the rating agencies, would recognize. So what we did was we converted an O&M cost into debt service to support the new bond issues. So we also found new revenue sources. So new revenue sources, for example, we renegotiated our pole attachment agreements. We also added over time more customers. We looked at old contracts, customers that were on special contracts, and made some changes there. We also cut expenses, for example, in monetizing or unused natural gas pipeline capacity contracts, and found value there. And we renegotiated our wholesale power contract. So the savings.
Expand on that, on the natural gas thing. Help me understand how you were able to cut money and bring in more revenue.
Our utility, we were essentially vertically integrated and had our own power plant, still have our own power plant. Up until 1972, the utility manufactured 100% of its energy. Post 1972, they began to rely on external energy, wholesale power purchases. Today, we probably produce on our own right here in the city less than 1% of our energy. The other 99% is now imported through dual redundant transmission interconnections. So that allowed us to operate our power plant far less than we ever had in the past. At the same time, in order to support that power plant operation, the city wisely had entered into long-term contracts for natural gas pipeline capacity, interstate pipeline transmission capacity to bring gas to the plant. Since we were no longer using that natural gas capacity at the same rate, same volumes that we had many years before, we were able to begin marketing that to others who needed it. So we now remarket or make available to others, the buyers in the market who need that capacity on a temporary basis, to make use of that. So that produced some incremental revenue for us at the same time that we were cutting costs in how we were buying wholesale energy and getting more revenues from pole attachments, modifying some things in our rate structure with special contracts. So we created the headroom, we will, of the space to cover the debt service on the bonds that we sold to invest in capital improvements, which then helped lower operating expenses. The way that we reduced operating expenses with the bond issues is it gave us the capital to fund capital projects, and we were able to put our workforce to work on capital projects. So rather than expensing as an operating expense their labor during periods of time when they were working on a bona fide, real capital project, that time was able to be charged against the capital project as opposed to the operating expense.
So instead of having your people running around with duct tape and wire, they're now running around building capital, which will return money for you. So they went from MacGyver to not MacGyver.
Exactly. So instead of putting out the fire on a burning pole and putting in a temporary cross arm, we're taking the pole down, putting up a new pole, new cross arms, new transformers, new insulators, new wire, higher operating voltage. So that new stuff is capital. And that time spent on the capital project can be paid for out of bond issues and then covered by debt service. And you no longer have the higher operating expenses. So we transitioned, for example, in our line department, what we call our linemen are, we were able to take probably 30 to 50% of our operating cost and move it over into the capital category. Very, very common in the utility industry. It just wasn't being done here. So it's same people, great culture, excellent craftsmanship and workmanship and commitment, great people doing the same work, but properly accounting for it by building new infrastructure and charging their time to that project.
And I got to believe they're happier. If I'm running around putting out random fires all day long, I'm just exhausted at the end of the day. But if I'm building something new, improving reliability, improving service, saving customers money, I go home happy.
Yes, you do. But having been through this type of change process in other utilities and other businesses, the course of my career, I realized that if you're on the receiving end of that process with somebody you don't know calling the shots, there's a certain amount of trepidation and fear. Well, what's this new person going to do? Yeah. Are they going to cut expenses by cutting people? And my view was, no, the opposite. I might, in fact, add people. Because we have a lot of work to do. We just need to find a way to pay for it. We have to stop wasteful activities, which we certainly had some, and focus on things that create more value. So it was a shifting of the culture. They use the same trucks, the same tools, different size wire, different size transformers, but they're doing the things that they're excellent at. Instead of putting out fires, now they're building new infrastructure, and every week, every month, every year, there are fewer and fewer fires to put out.
So same number of people.
Give
me a before and an after. So when you first arrived, describe the utility, and then I want you to describe where you are today.
Well, the utility was often the subject of criticism, of jokes. It had a reputation for high prices and low reliability. Not a very good formula for successful soup, right? Bad formula. We've now been able to change that from very competitive rates. For the 4 consecutive years, we've been lower in cost than our neighboring cities, and reliability has improved. In our case, we call that a decrease, right? In outage rates have reached levels that were unheard of for the city, and we're now very, very competitive statewide in our reliability and in our rates. We're not done.
How do you measure reliability? Tell me this.
We measured very, very precisely. We were fortunate to have very precise metering that allows us to record power and outages, down to the second. We count every outage, and we measure frequency of outages, duration of outages, whether they're sustained or interrupt or momentary outages, and then the time that it takes us to restore. So there are 4 key measures in the electric utility industry that everybody that is likely listening to this podcast has probably seen or heard. All utilities track these and are benchmarked on these, and we measure those precisely. it wasn't the type of thing either that we were going to look at it at the end of the year and see how we did this year. We look at it every month, and we benchmark ourselves every month, and we have discussions about all of our outages, mostly the larger outages. What happened, what caused it, what can we do to prevent it, what's next. It's not a finger pointing exercise. I use a lot of analogies. If you're on my team, you'll know that. You'll probably roll your eyes eventually, heard enough of them. But I said, name a football team that scores on every play. They don't, right? You have plenty of plays where the ball gets dropped. You don't get to the goal line. You don't get to the first or 10-yard line. It doesn't happen, right? You don't get that first down. But you get back to the huddle. You don't scream and yell at each other. You call another play and you run the next play. And you learn from what you just did on the sideline at halftime or going into next week's game. But it's that kind of a view, and having everybody involved. Everybody counted, whether it was a lineman, somebody in the storeroom, department head. Some of the people became department heads because they began to shine in this new environment and excel, and rose from the position of engineer, for example, to assistant director, and now part of my immediate leadership team.
Wow.
Some great transformation.
Wow. Well, let me transition now. You've turned our utility around. Congratulations, good for you. And I love. By
thank you to the team. They're the ones who did. The team did the work. I'm the conductor of the orchestra, but I tell you, I can't play the instruments. But they sure make some great music together.
That's really good to hear. And I'm an analogy metaphor guy as well, and I love that one, especially because you're right. You're not playing the violin, but you're naming the song, you're organizing everybody, you're making sure everybody's working together, and they're all playing the same song and playing it well. It sounds like you started with a good group and just getting them aligned in order. So I want to transition. You're now and for those of you maybe skipped over, this is Ed Liberty, who is the Director of Electric Utility for the city of Lake Worth Beach, and you're the president of FMEA. So tell me a little bit about the challenges you see for the organization, and then the challenges you see for the industry over the next 3 to 5 years.
I think the challenges I see, right? I know the challenges that I see for the organization is how quickly change is coming. Many of our members are from small rural communities. And the world of electric utilities is changing dramatically, and it's not changing just because of things that we are electing to do internally in utility management and technology. It's things that are being thrust upon us. It's the advent of state regulators or legislators, for example, looking very closely at how we manage and how we move money in our organizations to and from our cities that own us. We look at how legislators are viewing technology, not from the standpoint of electric utility technology, but technology in computing, data centers, for example, and AI, and the huge loads, electric loads that come with this gold rush to AI, and concern on part of legislators and regulators in the industry on who's going to bear that cost and who's going to be on the hook if that materializes faster than we expect or slower than we expect, or they come and expenses are incurred and then not fully recovered. So they are very concerned about how these costs could be dropped on the everyday consumers, that residential customer, the small commercial customers.
And let me help me understand that. So I'm NVIDIA, and I come to Lake Worth Beach, and I find a 12-acre piece of property, and I said, I want to build a data center here. As a novice and somebody on the outside looking in, I think, oh, this is going to be awesome for the utility. They're going to have all this money they'll be able to generate, but it may mean, I'm guessing you're going to tell me it means we need to build a new power plant to meet that demand, new wires, new systems, and under the current infrastructure, the current laws, I got to amortize that across my customers. Tell me what's the concern, because I would think this is like a cash cow for you, but it sounds like there's more to it than just what I'm thinking.
I think if properly structured, it can be a cash cow. The problem though becomes unlike, let's say you looked at this as a residential development that might have come in 20 years ago, and they built 300 homes. Just pick an easy number. You could say, well, those 300 homes are going to be there for decades and decades and decades. And you know that the customer who buys it at that home on day one may not be the customer there 15 years from now, but that home will still be there and there'll be another customer in that home. When you look at something like a data center, you can say, well, that big concrete building is going to go up. There's not going to be any windows on it. There's not a lot of jobs there. They're going to have a huge load. I'm going to have to build a lot of infrastructure to serve it, not just in the wires and the transformers locally, but in the transmission system to get the power there and the power plant, which may be 50 or 100 or 200 or 300 miles away, bringing the power to it. That one customer, if they go away, what happens to that investment that was made? How is that recovered? Because that's probably going to be funded through bonds or long-term debt on the part of the utilities. And if that customer ceases to operate for whatever reason, those other customers are going to be bearing that expense well into the future. Not to mention, not the least of which is the impact on the physical environs of having this large infrastructure built. So a larger power plant has to be built someplace, perhaps more transmission towers, more lines. If you can use the existing towers or carry more load, double up or new substations, that all has an impact. And there's environmental impact, there's space impact, visual impacts that are well beyond the community that's realizing the cash flow from the load. So there's a lot of complex issues that have to be looked at, a lot of stakeholders that have a legitimate opinion that needs to be listened to so you can come up with the best all-around solution. We all want the benefits of supercomputing.
So I guess signing a 20-year lease could be meaningless if the company goes belly up.
Right. So typically the bonds are going to be 30 or more years, and the infrastructure is going to be there for many, many, many years. It consumes land, airspace, or environmental emissions, water consumption, all those types of things have to be taken into account. So it's very, very complex that go beyond the borders of that immediate municipality that's glad to have that new large load. That's quite an impact, and that's why.
Yeah, and especially if you're currently
it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, if you have 5 power plants and you run 3 of your most efficient, but occasionally you got to run the 4th on summertime in August, and from 4 to 8 at night, but you got the 5th one, it's under repair. It's there if you need it. Now suddenly this group comes in and you're like, I need a new power plant. Totally. And it's a several $100 million investment. I had never thought about it from that perspective, that's a long-term investment for what might be a short-term customer. If suddenly the world changes and AI goes away or data center goes bankrupt, you're stuck. I'm reminded of, many years ago, Port St. Lucie invested all this money in Digital Domain, a company that came not too far from you, that came in. They were going to, transform the the movie industry in Southeast Florida. They lasted a few years, went bankrupt, and the county was left holding the bag. So I understand it in that regard. Are you guys looking at any data centers? I have any coming in, and how would you address that?
I think we've had some casual interest. I call it casual because nobody's actually shown up with a firm proposal. There's certainly plenty of consulting firms that would like to help us. Put out the honey and see if people will come to nibble on it. We have an old power plant site that would certainly lend itself well to that. And I think other, members in FMEA have a similar situation. I think, going back to the earlier point on what's changing rapidly, we're a little bit of, I would call this, my analogy would be the super collider of things that are happening in industry. So not only is this demand suddenly, at least from a projection point of view, looking like it's going to be a tremendous impact, but on the other side, we have aging infrastructure, namely the power plants that many of us rely on, are also nearing end of life. So you have aging infrastructure in the power generation side, where many of us are moving over to solar and some new power plants. But as our older power plants are starting to get closer to that 10-year range of retirement, or even 1 or 2 year range or months of retirement, suddenly you have this huge load coming forward. So there's this tremendous pressure on the industry to build a new capacity to meet these new loads. At the same time, that old capacity is getting closer to retirement. So you have to build for the new and replace what you're retiring. So that's pretty important. We generally all want to reduce our air emissions, do a better job with cleaner power, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go solar, but things like that. We all have to take a look at options for energy storage, because that may be a way to more effectively utilize the infrastructure that we have. So there's a huge number of things that are happening all at the same time, not all of the communities that are valued members in our organization have all of the resources to address these changes. At the same time, like I said before, regulators and legislators looking from the outside in to make sure that the consumer, the embedded consumer, the legacy consumer is protected.
I want to get to the regulatory environment, but before I have a quick question. Ed, if we were having this conversation, let's say 5 years ago, 2021, or let's say pre-COVID, I guess and ask you to look into your crystal ball, your electrified crystal ball, of course, you would have said what EVs coming online is going to put a burden on the power grid. And then EVs kind of leveled off, their popularity leveled off. The manufacturers, I remember Audi promising by 2025 they would only produce EVs, and I was like looking so forward to that. But they're still at $150,000 each. I'm like, okay, not yet.
Yes.
But that seems to have been supplanted by these AI data centers.
It certainly is, and there's a big question mark in AI. I think are there 10 deals that are viable, or are there 10 people shopping the same 10 deals and it looks like 100, right? So where is the reality of this? And then you have developers, obviously, in some states building data centers on spec, figuring that they'll build a data center and the market of servers will arrive at the doorfront and the data will start processing through there. So I think it's hard for us to get our arms around how big it could be. And I think the reality of it is that, and it's one of the benefits of being a part of FMEA, is that your problem or opportunity is not yours alone, because we're all interconnected. We're interdependent on each other. We're the same generation resources, the same transmission systems. So it's unlikely that any one municipal member is going to build a power plant just for the data center being built in their territory.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's more likely going to be some kind of a group effort, and it's going to affect all of us. And that's the reality of it. And I think that's an exciting part, because we all have to work together to arrive at a solution that makes sense for all of us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talk back to you're putting on your FMA hat again, regulatory challenges. What do you see in the regulatory environment that your members need to be aware of and be concerned about or be happy about?
I think the regulatory environment is becoming much more attentive to costs. So whether it's because natural gas prices have increased or a lot of new investment being made that has to be capitalized and recovered in utilities statewide, state regulators are very, very much concerned with what's happening with energy costs. So what that's causing them to do is to look very closely at the investment decisions that the utilities are making. So whether it's a municipal utility or an investor-owned utility, it doesn't matter so much. They really want to get into the weeds on why you're spending the money, what you're actually paying for, how that money is being sourced, where it's going to, who it's benefiting, and making sure that they have controls. Because the public is clamoring and not justifiably concerned about rising energy costs. And there's no one reason, there's no one solution. It doesn't matter whether they're on one side or the other of these arguments politically, left or right, or environmentally, pro-solar, not pro-solar, natural gas versus coal versus nuclear. The reality is that costs are going up for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the cost to actually move that power reliably from point A to point B.
And the cost of land is going up. So as you have to acquire new land to build a power plant, extension lines, whatever. Right. That in and of itself, because land is becoming scarcer as we add 1,000 people a day to the state, it only makes sense that not just the scarcity principles alone, the cost of building is got to be going up.
Right. And where is it going to be built? So if you look at how the nation industrialized and where the populations began and grew around industrial centers, and population centers were right there by the power plants. So it's not unusual to find older cities with power plants in the cities. Well, as those power plants grow older and need to be replaced, it's not, in all cases, it doesn't necessarily make sense to build an entirely new power plant right in the middle of a highly populated area. And especially when
where
you
the land is most valuable and it could be, better purpose for something else.
exactly. And if you look at solar, it requires much more land area for a given unit of output. Now you're pushing the production of power into the rural areas. And so now you're potentially infringing on wetlands or farmlands or forest lands, and much more concern there as well. And
Yeah.
then the infrastructure to deliver the power has to change as well, because it was intended to move from A to B, not from C to B to A. So you have to look at it very closely. So there's a lot of stakeholders. I'm not going to presume to say, oh, I have a magic answer here. Just do exactly this, and everybody's going to be happy. That's obviously not going to happen. There's a lot
I
to
was
it.
hoping for that on the podcast, the magic formula that everybody can go, okay, I got the answer now.
The benefit that we have in working in unison through FMEA is that, the things that divide us are far less important than the things that unite us. And so we work together very closely, and we have a way through joint action of being able to get an audience with regulators and legislators to make our point and have our voice be heard in a much more powerful way. We have experts, whether it's our lobbyists or folks like Amy Zuberly, that run our organization to get that access and be able to get the attention of a legislator, even if it's for a few minutes, to be able to get our points across and hear our voices heard. So that's important to us.
Well, we do a lot of work with local governments, and it seems to me that there's no more important role in a local government than making sure when I flip that switch, the light comes on, and when I flip it the other way, the light goes off. It may be equal to when I push the toilet thing, the water goes away and I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yes.
But those are the core functions of government. And a lot of that's under attack right now, doubting the efficacy of government. But it sounds to me like we're going to be really careful touching the municipal utilities, because that's such an important thing. Hey, if a road doesn't get repaired within 6 months or 8 months, whatever. But if my lights don't come on, we got troubles. And as we both know, we were lucky enough not to have a storm this year. Thank you. But when we do, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, the public demands that you get that back up and running. And I know you have a bunch of systems in place, whether it's mutual aid or whatever, extra storage of utility supplies, shared supplies, et cetera, that we get it back up and running as quickly as possible.
I'll jokingly say to people that customers expect their power to be restored before it goes out.
I'm going to steal that because it's perfect, right? I mean, when something is as common as the air, when I breathe in, I want air, and
right.
Suddenly I don't get it. I'm panicking.
Right.
We had a storm in Tallahassee. I guess it's going on a decade now, and we had lost power for 3 days. I was dating a woman at the time from South Florida who was talking about being without water for 2 weeks, and people up here were losing their minds. Just absolute. We love our trees in Tallahassee, and we love them when they don't get trimmed until a hurricane trims them. And as you know, a hurricane trimming your trees is not quite as delicate as a professionally trained arborist trimming around the wires. And so a lot of trees fell down on one neighborhood had 37 trees fall down on power poles, one neighborhood. And yet we were back to 95% capacity in 3 days. But for the average person, it wasn't enough.
Right.
That's why I'm not jealous of that 11-year-old boy who decided he wanted to go in public power. I'm like, good for you, Ed, because I couldn't have taken it. I'd be strangling people.
Well, we certainly have those moments, but at the end of the day, I can share that, we all go home and our families are sharing the same frustrations when the power goes out, and we do too. And so we know how important it is. And when something that you expect to work all the time suddenly doesn't. And I also say that electricity is what divides society from an organized, well-moving organization to anarchy without power.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't imagine living life without electricity. You can say, well, I'll take a nap, or I'll go outside, I'll go for a walk, and it'll be back. When it's out for a day, 2 days, 3 days, a week, or something like that, and you realize that everything that in your life um, is weakened
A
or
friend of mine
diminished
just
because you
returned
don't have electricity.
a friend of mine just returned from his fourth trip in Jamaica, and these were people who were already living on the edge. But it's so scary how quickly society reversed. Because Ed, you're exactly right. Without electricity, and these people don't have electricity, running water, either incoming or outgoing, and the feudalism that immediately embarks, and that old expression, "We're going to knock you back to medieval times," is true. I mean, it is horrific to see how these people have to live, and largely because and there's no prospect for getting electricity in any time soon because of the infrastructure concerns all the way up and down the chain.
So I view electricity as a lifeline service, and we have many people that may be in weakened immune state, different stages of various illnesses, elderly, and being able to have a home that is air conditioned and is comfortable, that has clean flowing water, where you can actually make a phone call, you can get entertainment. Those things are very, very important elements of maintaining a life and structure. And if you're at the stage of your life where you're working or going to school, being able to put fuel in the vehicle or charge the vehicle or go to the gas station or get diesel, being able to go to the supermarket and the products are on the shelves, and they haven't spoiled. Those are just critically important things. And it evolves from electricity. Many of us talk about how many customers we have. We think about that as a meter, but behind every meter, there's probably 4 or 5 or 6 customers that live in that household, especially in city area, rural, municipal.
True
So
service.
that's a big deal. You provide a very important function to the community.
No, absolutely. Said I've kept you longer than I asked you to be on, but I want to close with one other question. If public power is going to stay strong over the coming decade, what do you think needs to be challenged politically, publicly, technologically? What do you see as kind of the big spot, to quote Stephen Covey, the big spot on the wall that needs to happen or be addressed if public power is going to stay strong over the next decade?
I think public power needs to be able to raise capital and implement new technologies just as easily as investor-owned utilities can, for example. Access to capital to continue to implement the technologies and the equipment and the scale of the investor-owned utilities is important. I did spend most of my career in the investor-owned utility side, and sometimes some people ask me, which one do you like better and which one is better? And I said, well, they're both good. That one is not necessarily better or worse than the other. They work because they work. One works for citizens, the other works for investors, who may also be the citizens in the community. So I think those two models need to work very, very closely together. As I said, within the House, the things that divide us are very, very small compared to the things that really unite us, which is the service.
And I'm glad to hear that, because it bothers me. Listen, I live in Tallahassee. In the legislative session, groups that normally work hand in glove together end up becoming arch enemies up in session. But it's nice to hear that you're complimentary of the private-owned utilities as well. You do serve a similar purpose, slightly different ways. And you're right, neither is great and neither is bad. And they both work, and they both work in their own thing. Never let the twain fight each other, because we'll all suffer as a result of that.
I think to that point, I stress this to people: we are successful in no small part because we have an access to a transmission system, electric transmission system, that gives us the ability to generate power at scale and then buy power from more cost-effective sources or resources than we could if we were trying to do it by ourselves. So if you can imagine that every one of us had to have our own small power plant, that would not give us the level of reliability and cost that we could have by being interconnected through a transmission system. Now, in the state of Florida, those transmission systems are owned by the large investor-owned utilities, and they are among the best in the nation. And some could argue that they might even be the best in the nation at moving power from point A to point B. That system is very important to us. We don't own it; we pay to use it. That's extremely important to us. Now, on their side, I would suppose that they would say, "Hey, we have many, many more customers helping to pay for this transmission system that we needed to build to serve our own customers anyway." So it's good that we share it through this open access transmission tariff. So we have more volume. It works. So we can do a lot of things together that work for the mutual benefit. And that helps us all be successful. At the end of the day, we want the state of Florida to prosper. We want it to be known as a safe state with a reliable power, reasonable rates, and a welcoming place for people to plan on bringing their businesses to and raising their families here. And as we look around, certainly the Central America and the Caribbean, this is a place where many people want to be and share in that dream. And electricity, whether it's investor owned or municipal owned, is a very important part of that formula.
Excellent. I love it. Ed, well, first of all, thank you so much for being on. Congratulations on presidency with FMEA. Congratulations on turning around as you did. Took a long time, didn't take a minute. Lake Worth Beach. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Folks, this is Steve Vancore, and you've been listening to the Florida Public Powercast, sponsored by Praxel Line Services. They are an FMEA elite sponsor. Thanks, guys, for sponsoring. And it also, of course, brought to you by the Florida Municipal Electric Association, your statewide voice for public power. Thanks for joining us.